And now we're moving on with the program. And of course, as accountants, we also need to know what is changing in our world of accountancy. And yes, we are very honored to have somebody from the International Federation of Accountants, from the IFAC. Yes, he's a board member and chair of the audit committee of IFAC. This is Dr. Weenan Shroff, and he's just arrived in the early hours of today. So can I please just request Mr. Shroff to please come on stage. He's a certified German auditor and a senior partner at KPMG. During his 34 years at KPMG, he has held several senior leadership roles within KPMG at the national, European, and global levels. Dr. Saab, thank you so much for coming to Pakistan.
Thanks,
and I'm sure the audience would like to learn a lot about what's changing in the accountancy profession.
Thanks very much for the warm words of welcome. And dear President Chamdia, distinguished colleagues, it's my great pleasure to be here today. And first of all, I'm bringing warmest greetings from the IFAC leadership and our president, Ms. Rachel Grimes. I've been invited to come here to share with you a few thoughts about what's going on in the regulatory scene, in the standard setting. My presentation is actually titled The Future of International Standard Setting for Accountants, for the Accountancy Profession. It reads differently in this flyer, the program. It says, Resetting the Standard Setting Model, Enhancing Public Trust, or Recipe for Chaos? And I leave it to you to answer that question at the end of my presentation. I know that I'm the last obstacle between you and lunch, so I try to be brief. Although it is necessary for you to understand what's going on actually, that I take you back a little bit and explain to you what the current model of standard setting for the accountancy profession at the global level looks like today. And I will then share with you some proposals by the monitoring group for strengthening the governance of international standard setting and how that might change the model, and will also have consequences on the mental model and in the profession, not only in the auditing profession. And I will also, of course, explain IFAC's reactions and finally draw some conclusions. Before we can look at what is being discussed currently, you should understand how all that what we have today has evolved. IFAC has been established exactly 40 years ago, in November 1977. That was the time when globalization took place, or was kind of matured at that time. It started earlier. And when people realized cross-border investment is not very efficient because of a lack of trust and confidence of financial reporting, or in financial reporting cross-border. So there was the need recognized, the need for international standardization, the need for standards that can be understood and applied globally. And that first of all led to the creation of the International Accounting Standards Committee in 1973, and later on in 1977 to the creation of IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants. And under the roof of this professional organization, there was three objectives identified. One was to establish international standards on auditing, international education standards for accountants, and the ethics code for professional accountants. It is remarkable, and I think you all should know, that these were initiatives led by the profession, by professional accountancy organizations. At the beginning, it was only 33 from 51 countries. And you can be proud. ICAP, your institute, was one of the founding members back in 1977. Today, we have about 175 members from over 135 countries. The standards that have been developed over time, the last 40 years, are characterized as principles-based and covering the whole financial reporting supply chain. So that includes not only the back end, I would say the auditing, it would also include the accountant in business. And I know that the majority of you today here are accountants in business. And the majority of the profession that is represented by IFAC, over 3 million professional accountants in the world, the majority of which are professional accountants in business. So IFAC recognizes that the majority of the profession are accountants in business. So in 1977 we were optimistic. I was at university at that time, so I have some memories, but some may have no memories of that. And then it happened in the early 2000s that we had some major accounting scandals that triggered governance reforms. It was not only the Enron, the WorldCom, it were some other accounting scandals involved in it, and that definitely triggered reforms to establish external audit oversight bodies that were independent from the profession. You may say that was finally the end of self-regulation for the profession in many, many jurisdictions in the world. Finally, the IASC, the International Accounting Standards Committee, got restructured, independent from the profession. And IFAC agreed to reforms that also brought some independence in standard setting. It was triggered by the monitoring group of international organizations and regulators that forced IFAC to accept these reforms. In particular, that the standard setting boards would not have the majority of professional accountants. The membership of professional accountants was reduced to 9 of 18, so just 50%. And then there was a public interest oversight board established in 2005, not in 2000. It was in 2005 established, and everything, almost everything within IFAC from then was transparent to public oversight. So that is an important shift in the model up or from then. And then in 2008, you all remember that Lehman Brothers collapsed and the world was different from then. The world was totally different. More effective oversight was called for, in particular for financial markets, including the audit profession. And the IAASB was urged to revise the standards and publish the Clarity ISAs in 2009, and IAASB started a revision of the ISA 700, that's the auditor's report. The IASBA launched a project to tackle the issue of non-compliance with law and regulation, called NOCLAR, non-compliance of law with law and regulation, meaning bribery and corruption, of course. And everything that was done by the IAASB and by the Essex board in the end did not please the Public Interest Oversight Board. There were still some points where they wanted more. They wanted more for the profession to do and to guarantee and to provide assurance on. Where the profession felt we can't just give guarantees that the company is free from corruption, and we cannot guarantee that the company will continue as a going concern forever. So that are the issues. In 2005, the monitoring group, I remember you to the composition of that, IOSCO, IFIA, the World Bank, the European Commission, and other organizations gathered and asked IFAC for more reforms on standard setting to address the perceived undue influence by the profession in standard setting. And in 2017, we finally received a public consultation on strengthening the governance and oversight of audit-related standard setting in the public interest. So that's where we are today, and I'd like to draw a conclusion of what the current model is right now. The current model right now is public oversight by the PIOB over almost everything that IFAC does. In particular of the standard setting, you see the three blue at the bottom, three boxes. The International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, International Education Standards Board, the Ethics Standards Board. Please remember the membership in these boards from the profession is limited to 9 of 18, so 50%. And everything is overseen by PIOB, and that is also a matter of fact, that the funding is to 99% brought by IFAC, including the contributions made by the international networks through the Forum of Firm, that amounts to about 50% of the cost of standard setting of today. The concerns that the monitoring group expressed in this consultation that was launched last year in November, they are: first, there is an adverse effect on stakeholder confidence in the standards as a result of a perception of undue influence by the profession, because of IFAC manages the nomination process of standard setting boards and directly funds, provides support and staffing for the standard setting boards. And second, because of audit firms and professional accountancy organizations provide a majority of board members and their technical directors. I think you realize that this is a false statement, definitely a false statement. And I quote from the consultation paper by the monitoring group. The second reason is for the concerns is partly because of undue influence. There is a risk that standards are not developed truly in the public interest. And third, relevance and timeliness of standards is that the standard setting boards are not responding in a timely way to calls for revision from the regulatory community. I will come back to these points, to these concerns issued or expressed by the monitoring group, but let me first introduce a few proposals that have been made by the monitoring group. The first topic is, let's say, the overarching principle for standard setting should be the public interest. The public interest as the overarching principle. That is something that anybody can subscribe to. That is nothing new. But the problem is that public interest has never been clearly defined. So that is a workable assumption. It needs to be defined, and that is also that the monitoring group has asked the PIOB to write a framework, to establish a framework that can be used in assessing the standards, whether they are in the public interest. Today, I think there is no set of criteria that standards can be assessed. The second most important point is that the monitoring group suggests that the standard setting boards should be merged in a way that the International Audit and Assurance Standards Board, the IAASB, and the Ethics Board should be merged to focus on auditing only. And the rest, what the Ethics Board does, that is in particular ethics for accountants in business, That should be left with IFAC and should be regulated separately. So one single board for ISIS and ethics for all types of audits. We're not talking listed companies only, we're talking all types of statutory audits that are required. The membership reduced to 12, more focusing on strategic work rather than drafting. Multi-stakeholder representation, users, regulators, and auditors, but in a group of 12. So if that means auditors, practitioners would be limited to 4 of 12. The appointments should be made by the Public Interest Oversight Board, no IFAC, no nomination through IFAC anymore. And the standard setting board members should be remunerated. 3 full-time, 9 part-time. I think that is important for you to know. So it would affect the accountants in business as well. Just one more important process. That is the nomination process. The nomination process should be governed by the PIOB long term. That is the idea. And if the PIOB remained as it is today, just a representation of governmental organizations or international organizations like IOSCO, the Organization of Security Oversight, and of audit regulators, then it would not provide any opportunity for IFAC to be part of this. I've here listed all the attributes that the PIOB should have, but I'm not going, in the interest of time, not going to talk to each and everything. For us, for IFAC, and I think also for you, it is important that all the stakeholder groups that have an interest in the reliability and the credibility of financial reporting are represented in the standard setting process. So that would be the users, of course, the analysts, and that would also be the preparers. That would also be audit committee chairs. That would also include the accountancy profession, the auditors in particular. So that's definitely a point where the MG monitoring group proposals do not leave any room for IFAC to be engaged. And that would mean if there is no room for IFAC, there is no room for the institutes, there is no room for the professional organizations. There may be room for 3 or 4 individuals, but that is not the same. To summarize that model that the monitoring group has proposed, that's my own summary, the monitoring group takes over control through the PIOB over the standard setting. And there is, as you can see here, there is no practitioner, no IFAC nominee, no representation of a wider stakeholder community as yet in the PIOB or in the oversight. On the other hand, the PIOB or the monitoring group, they all don't have money. They all expect the accountancy profession to continue its funding and even increase the amounts of funding because of remunerated board members and additional staff that should do the work instead of what we have today, task forces where the institutes provide contribution in kind, and that is definitely something that the monitoring group doesn't want to continue with. So, increased funding requirements or requests, but no funding contribution from the monitoring group or its member bodies. So the IFAC reaction to that, very brief. IFAC supports that standard setting should be in the public interest and public interest should be defined. So that's fine with us. IFAC supports a multi-stakeholder composition of the standard setting boards. Even it would reduce the membership of the active practitioners from 9 to 4. The consideration of a smaller standard setting board, it has difficulties because global representation might become difficult if you have 12 instead of 18. IFAC also supports a review and a clarification of the roles and the responsibilities of the PIOB, also some independent chair for the nominating process. That's all fine with IFAC. On the other hand, IFAC is concerned about a number of issues with the consultation paper. First of all, to start off with the significant deficiencies of the consultation paper itself, including false statements, as I've shown you just one today. IFAC is also concerned about the debatable assumption that only regulators can act in the public interest, and acting in the public interest may require standards to be adopted even if not all stakeholders agree. That is a problem. So a veto right for the PIOB for standards is something that is not acceptable. The monitoring group is moving away from a shared, what we see today, shared public-private model of standard settings in the public interest. It's moving towards a regulatory model where regulators can exercise undue influence, in our view. The risk that more rules-based prescriptive standards will be produced in the future in order to remove all the professional judgment, that what the profession is proud about, should be removed from audit at least, and they're promoting compliance-type audits that are easy to monitor and to enforce. IFAC is concerned that there is a significant risk that jurisdictions may revert back to national standards. Standard setting might not keep pace with disruptive technology changes that we've heard this morning. And IFAC is also concerned that significantly more costly and less cost-effective standard setting would be the consequence. IFAC does not support the merger of the IAASB and the Ethics Committee for audit-related standards, therefore the bifurcation of ethics for professional accountants, auditors versus all other professional accountants. IFAC does not support the PIOB acting as the nomination committee for membership, and IFAC does definitely not support the funding model via contractual levy on audit firms. That would definitely heighten the perception issues of undue influence by audit professionals. And IFAC does, of course, not want to see the model, the future model, developed in stages. Let me draw some conclusions for you that help to answer the question that was posed. Is that a recipe for chaos, or is that building trust? You, the CFOs, the accountants in business, are an important element in the financial reporting supply chain. Therefore, of course, you should have a voice in this debate. And I can only congratulate the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Pakistan for the comment letter that was sent in to this consultation to the monitoring group. It clearly stated that it is not in your interest to have a merged board for audit standards and ethics. One single set of ethics is in the public interest for all professional accountants. The monitoring group proposals characterize what I see the general pattern of reaction to a crisis. The pendulum swinging back from deregulation that we've seen in the 80s, 90s of the last century, now to regulation and over-regulation. It is from principles-based standards to rules, to prescriptive rules. It is that regulators take over control of the standard setting while at the same time, the same regulator is responsible for oversight and for enforcement. So it is clear should be clear to everybody that self-regulation of the accountancy profession is no longer accepted. By the way, interesting to note, if you want to look at the comment letters that were received by the monitoring group, it's more than 179 comment letters that are published on the monitoring group. IOSCO is hosting that site. While the international financial reporting standards take a different approach, they are requiring more and more judgment, professional judgment by preparers. The regulators, as I said, tend to eliminate professional judgment from the audit and to strictly enforce compliance with rules. That will have consequences. That will definitely have a shift in mindset of auditors. And there we are approaching the question of this conference today, the shift in mindset, the evolving mindset. And I don't see this as some favorable shift in mindset from professional judgment to compliance. That's definitely not the way we, the profession, want the standards to be developed. We see this combined with potentially more automated audit processes. We see the auditing profession becoming less relevant in this case. And we see and we realize definitely today a decline in interest by young talent. But there's also the risk of unintended adverse effects. Some jurisdictions, as I said earlier, might revert back to national standards. And that is in the context of what we heard earlier today of nationalism and populism, might create new barriers to international trade and international foreign direct investment. So please reflect the thoughts presented by Professor Hussain earlier this morning. But to leave you with some optimism, IFAC is continuing its dialogue with the monitoring group on behalf of its member bodies. As I said earlier, representing almost 3 million professional accountants worldwide, the majority of which being professional accountants in business as yourself. IFAC will continue promoting quality and credibility along the entire financial reporting supply chain, and that is definitely something that we all do in the public interest. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Dr. Shroff, thank you so much for some very valuable thoughts. And I think some of the changes that you've spoken about, I think it's a little difficult time of the day. But I think there's some serious stuff out there. I mean, if it comes to regulation only, and I think the last point that you made, that this might seem a little bit unattractive for the talent that otherwise we would look to attract. So I think all of us who are still looking at their phones right now, this was a huge change that you've spoken about. And I think in Pakistan and even in the region, it will take a while for people to actually absorb the big change that's coming in. And more so for the larger firms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But thank you so much, Dr. Shroff, for your thoughts. May I please request Mr. Riaz Chamdia, the President of ICAP, to please come on stage and present a memento to Dr. Shroff.
Thank you very much.
And I think with the entire digital revolution, the auditing profession and the accounting profession is bound to change. I'm not sure if this presentation is echoing to some of the changes across the globe in terms of better compliance and in terms of asking the accounting profession to make a bigger contribution. But thank you so much, Dr. Shroff, and we hope to see you in Lahore.